Ladies and gentlemen, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton, Chancellor Naomi Lynn, President Norman Stevens, and their daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand and join the 7 senators in honoring America by singing our national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Since I picked up the phone on Monday and was told that the White House was calling, it has been a memorable and exciting 72 hours. Now, in the midst of all of this activity, President Stuckel and I just returned from the Higher Education Appropriations hearing in the General Assembly. But I do want to extend my own personal welcome to all of you. Welcome to the University of Illinois at Springfield. At the outset, let me acknowledge on our stage the chairman of the Board of Trustees, Tom Lamont. On the platform also are Norm Stevens and his daughters. Dr. Stevens is the president of Lincoln Land Community College. Among our many special guests here today are several members of the General Assembly. Recently, President Clinton visited with students at Southern Illinois University. He talked with one student, a single parent, about the need to preserve and to strengthen financial aid. That student is from the University of Illinois at Springfield. And perhaps inspired by that event, she has been elected president of our student body. I'd like to ask Michelle Birch to stand and be recognized. Today is Bring Your Daughter to Work Day. There are many mothers and daughters in our audience. I did my part. My daughter Joanne is with me, a UIS graduate student. She's one of our 4 daughters. And my 2 granddaughters are with me, Jessica and Hillary. Should I confess to them that this is not a typical working day? Although our speaker, unfortunately, could not bring her daughter to work with her today, the First Lady, Hillary Rodham Clinton, exemplifies the best characteristics of a working mother. According to everything I read, she and the President are exceptionally conscientious parents in an unbelievably demanding situation. And while it may take a village to raise a child, the nurturing begins at home. Hillary Rodham Clinton is accomplished in many realms. She is an attorney, advocate for children, including active participation in the Children's Defense Fund, member of the boards of major corporations, newspaper columnist, role model for millions of professional women, exemplary mother. By the way of introduction, I want to relate a very personal experience. I found that the enthusiastic reception she received in Beijing at the International Women's Conference was very impressive because it crossed all partisan and all ideological lines. She made all of us who were there from the United States proud to be Americans. Because the general theme today is education, and because education is primarily a state and local government responsibility, I also draw your attention to the leadership role she played in educational reform in Arkansas when the president was governor there. Governor Clinton asked her to head a task force on education. She conducted hearings throughout the state, gathering the views of the public and many groups involved in educational policy. Elementary and secondary education in Arkansas were improved significantly because of her efforts. And that has made a difference in the lives of the people and especially the children of Arkansas. It is this kind of active participation in the life of the community, the state, and the nation that we would do well to emulate. Now it is my extreme pleasure to introduce to you the First Lady of the United States, Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Very much. I am so pleased to be here in this beautiful auditorium with all of you, and I particularly want to thank Chancellor Lynn. You know, there's an old saying, if you want to get something done, ask a busy woman to do it, and 72 hours ago, that's exactly what happened. I appreciated that kind introduction, but more than that, I really appreciate the Chancellor's leadership on behalf of education and her role in the conference in Beijing and the follow-up to that. I'm also pleased to be here with Dr. Stevens, and I know that we are electronically linked, not only to all of you here in person, but to a number of people joining us from Lincoln Land Community College, to whom I wish to say a special greeting. I also know, having grown up in Illinois, that the partnership between these two institutions is exemplary. The way that UIS and Lincoln Land have worked together sets an example for all of us as to what we should be doing in higher education. utilizing our community colleges and our 4-year and 2-year institutions and graduate programs to provide the full range of educational opportunities that all of our citizens need. I also know a little bit about the success in other areas here at this university and also at Lincoln Land. If I'm not mistaken, I am standing here on a campus that has been able to celebrate several soccer championships thanks to the Prairie Stars. And as I drove onto campus and I saw the sign about the soccer field, I was just delighted to see for myself where all of those victories took place. But I've also been advised that at Lincoln Land, the Loggers are quite the baseball champions, and I don't want to leave them out, and that women's softball does very well. And as someone who had the great good fortune of growing up in this state and attending public schools here, I know that the kind of offerings, both academic and extracurricular, that were available to me and my brothers when we were in school and remain available have helped to produce fine students and well-rounded young men and women. And so I congratulate not only the two campuses, but the communities that support them. And I am pleased to see so many of you here from the Springfield community because I know what great pride you take in both the university and Lincoln Land. I particularly wanted a chance to speak here and to talk about this partnership in education because I believe that there is no more important challenge facing us than how we will make our educational system not only work well and effectively, but make it open to all Americans who know that lifelong learning will now be required as we move into a much more complex and challenging time. This is a moment of great potential in the United States and in the world. One only has to think of the changes that are occurring at astonishing speed in the information age to see how connected we are around the world, to know that the kinds of skills that our children are acquiring are ones that I couldn't even dream of when I was their age. When I was over at the Child Development Center at Lincoln Land, I was talking to a little boy, no more than 5, probably 4, who just looked me right in the eye and said, "I saw you on my computer yesterday." There could not have been a better introduction to my being here than that. So the critical question we face in Illinois and around our country is how do we take this new potential and how do we put it to work? How do we meet all of the challenges that confront us as a nation? We start by putting our values in action. We start by not merely talking about our problems, nor merely arguing about them, but seeking to find common ground so that we can work to solve them. There is a lot that we can do together in our country, but we can't do it if we're pointing fingers or wringing hands. We have to be rolling up our sleeves and sitting across the table from each other and looking for ways that we can reach consensus. That's true no matter what challenge we choose. Just think about the challenges that we confront as we move toward the 21st century. We confront the challenge of cherishing children and strengthening families. I saw in action today when I was at the child care center, parents and teachers, experts and lay people working to try to help working parents, parents who are in school, not only get their education and keep their jobs, but know that their children are being given the best opportunities possible to develop physically and emotionally and intellectually. There is no doubt, as Chancellor Lynn said, that the primary responsibility for our children rests with those of us who are parents and family members. But I also know as a mother, that there are thousands and thousands of other adults who will influence my child whether or not I would choose that. There are those who police our streets. There are those who determine whether our air and water and food are safe and of good quality. There are business leaders who make decisions about what kinds of jobs will be available to parents. There are the producers who put the programs on our television screens and in our movie theaters. They too influence our children, and we have to decide whether we will all take responsibility to do what we know is in the best interests of all children. And that means not only in our own homes, but beyond as well. Certainly in our homes, we have the primary obligation of preparing our children. And if I could wave a magic wand, it would be that the lessons that I see being taught and learned at excellent centers like the one I visited this morning would be broadly available to not only every parent and every grandparent, but every adult. So that we would know, for example, that the first 3 years of life now are critical for the development of the brain. We have learned so much from neuroscience. We understand that what happens in those first 3 years, the stimulation that a child receives, the affirmation that the child is able to be given by those adults around him, could make a difference not only in their academic ability later, but in their emotional functioning as well. If every parent in Springfield and Illinois knew that if they talked to their babies, if they helped their babies understand that self-worth and self-respect was key to the kind of adults we need in the future, we would solve a lot of problems. If we had home visitors visiting families that were under stress and in difficult situations, as I learned about yesterday in Denver, we would be cutting child abuse and we would be increasing the capacity of more and more mothers and fathers to do the job they need to do. The responsibility for children is the principal responsibility that any of us face, whether as individuals or as members of society. And so all of the challenges we confront at bottom are really going to be determined by how well we treat the next generation. And there is no challenge more important than education. But I would like us to see education beginning from the years before school and continuing throughout the lifespan. We no longer can think of education as kindergarten through high school or kindergarten through college as we thought about it when I was growing up. We have to see that a parent is a child's first teacher, that those who are caretakers who come into contact with young children also have a responsibility to be teachers and examples, and that our schools, both the primary schools and secondary schools, as well as our colleges and universities, must be committed to providing education that will help mold young people into not only workers, those who will have jobs in the new global economy, but citizens as well. Now, how do we go about doing that? There's been a lot of conversation, and much of it has been very productive about how we can reform and renew our schools and how we can be sure that every young person and not so young in America knows what is at stake when it comes to education today. First, I would hope that we would recognize that there is a lot that works well with American education. We hear too much about the negative and not enough about the positive. And we need to recognize that although many of us, and as the Chancellor said, I have worked on education reform since 1983 in a very concerted way in my home state of Arkansas, my other home state, as well as up in Washington, that I also have taken time to praise what works and to be grateful for what works. Sometimes in America today, we dwell on our problems and don't count our blessings. And I think if we look around the world, It is very clear that the United States made a decision unlike most places in the world. Other places chose to honor public education in name only. There are nations I have visited where they say they have public education, but it only runs a few hours a day, and the vast majority of children just pass through the system until they drop out at an early age, because the primary means of educating the vast majority of those who go on is private education. There are other institutions of education in other parts of the world that also give lip service to trying to educate all children, but they too do not fulfill that promise. It is this country that has understood better than any in the course of history that our democracy and our prosperity rests on us educating all of our young people. And we should look at that as one of our major accomplishments. At the same time, we should not turn a blind eye to what we need to do better and how we should become more accountable and be willing to try different things. And that is certainly what the President and the Secretary of Education, Dick Riley, who will be here actually tomorrow, have tried to do. Both of them were governors of poor southern states, Dick Riley in South Carolina, my husband in Arkansas. And both of them knew that the future would not be kind, either to states or communities or individuals who did not understand that the kinds of jobs that would be available for us in the future would demand more skills than had been required in the past. Tomorrow, when Secretary Riley is here in Springfield, he will be launching a national summer reading program called Read Right Now. And it's a program that encourages adults and teenagers to spend time with young children so they will learn to read better and love reading more, so that when they return to school in the fall, they will be better prepared. So what shall we do as we confront this challenge of education? Well, much of what needs to be done is already being undertaken, but there are some additional steps we should also consider. First of all, we do need goals in education. And I know that for some that's a controversial concept, but it is very hard to imagine how we can know where we're going educationally as a nation, as a state, as a community, without having the goals we aim toward. Your soccer and baseball teams have not succeeded by not having goals. They've had goals and strategies to achieve those goals. The Goals 2000 program that was passed and is being implemented around the country sets forth goals but gives the responsibility for meeting those goals to state and local school boards and districts. But at least then we know what we are expecting one from the other. When I worked on education reform in Arkansas, I would find one school district in one part of the state sending many of its young people to college and those young people succeeding while another school district didn't. And when I looked a little bit further, I would find that the second school district didn't really know what was expected for their students, and what they taught as algebra was not the kind of algebra that would permit a child to be successful in higher education. There had to be some agreed upon goals. Meeting those goals, just like with a sports team, there are so many different ways to win. Different coaching styles, different motivational styles, different use of players. The goal is the same. The way to implement it can be and should be quite different depending upon the needs of the particular community. We also need to continue to promote the kind of partnerships between business and education that you have here at this university and this community college, so that businesses know that when we're talking about school to work, it is a reality. When young people are being trained at Lincoln Land, and if they choose not to go on after the second year but instead go into the workforce, their skills will be usable ones. And that's what is the real strength of community colleges around the country, that partnership with the business community. We also have to be sure that our schools are safe. Safe from drugs, safe from violence, and there are many steps being taken to try to ensure that. Children cannot learn if they are insecure in their learning environment. That may mean that school uniforms is a good idea in some places. We already have evidence that in many school districts, taking away the conflict over what one wears, taking away the consumer pressures on families to buy those special sneakers or that special jacket, not only eliminates a source of tension, including gang tension, but permits youngsters to focus on what should be their work in school. Again, that is not a formula for everyone, but it is something that many school districts are now taking a close look at. We have to be number one concerned about whether or not our schools are safe learning environments. There are other steps that we need to consider in the primary and secondary school, and I hope that every community and state will think about how they can ensure every child is able to read by the end of the 3rd grade. There are programs which we know work better than others, and we need to turn the attention of our education departments in our colleges and universities to promoting those programs which work, and not permitting students to remain in remedial education year after year after year. That is not a good thing for any of us to be promoting. And one of the surest way to help children learn to read is for parents to read to children. And I hope that even parents who feel a little shaky about that themselves will follow the advice of a woman I met in a Louisville school program for welfare mothers, where these mothers were brought into the school and their skills were upgraded and the children were given some enrichment. And this one mother said, "You know, I don't read very good, but you know what I figured out? My son doesn't know that. So I just hold that book and I just talk up a blue storm. The only problem," she said, "is the next day he wants me to read it the same way." Well, that's exactly the right attitude to have. That talking, that reading, that interaction. Turn off the television set. Be there for that child and spend time promoting those skills. We have to also look at how we can best prepare our teachers for the new challenges they face in our schools. I think it is much harder to teach today than when I was there. I believe that so many of my friends who are teachers feel like they're standing in front of even very young children, and they feel like every one of those children has a mental remote control device. And if they're not entertaining, they just click the channel. It is a lot harder. And teachers need more support, and they need more skills to be able to deal with a lot of the problems that come in the door of the classroom. But we also need to consider how we are going to encourage people to come into teaching who historically have been discouraged. How can we use alternative certification programs so that young people and even people in mid-career changes who want to consider teaching will be given the opportunity to do so? How can we reward excellent teachers besides taking them out of the classroom and moving them into administration? I really wish there were a way to keep those teachers who desperately want to teach, but know that their career path is such that if they're not promoted, they don't get the salary increase, they don't, unfortunately, get some of the status increase. We need to figure out a better way to reward those excellent veteran teachers who are master teachers and really set the tone. We have to focus on teaching, not administration. We have so many opportunities, if we use them, to keep good teachers in the classroom, but also to cut regulations, cut overhead, cut layers of management, so that there are more people interacting with kids on a daily basis. Many of the friends of mine who are in administration are a little bit sad about it. It's a bittersweet kind of promotion. They spend all their time on paperwork and they hardly ever get to see a youngster again. That's not good for them, and it's not good for us as well. One of the ways to do that is through an initiative that the President has been championing called charter schools, and I understand that Illinois is going to be doing some of this legislatively, and I applaud you for doing that. I have seen the results of what we call charter schools. These are schools within the public school system that are outside the regular flow of administration and bureaucracy. They are formed by teachers and principals coming together, sometimes by parents and community leaders. I was in a charter school in a very poor neighborhood in San Fernando, California. It was a school that was about 90% Hispanic American children, about 10% African American children, with a Chinese American principal and a Cuban American vice principal. I felt like I had walked into some kind of display of American contributions from our many different backgrounds. It became a charter school because the principal and the teachers and the parents knew they couldn't react quickly enough to the problems they faced if they had to go through the bureaucracy. Within a year of forming a charter school, they had raised the crack houses that were down the block. They had created what they called a family bank, where families who themselves did not have many resources came and traded what they needed, one with the other. One woman who needed transportation to get to work, another woman who needed child care, they would support each other. And they then had the highest attendance rate in their entire district, and they were beginning to see academic achievement because the school was no longer the school of the school district so much as it was the school of the community, of the teachers, of the parents, all of whom were committed to the children. So charter schools within the public school system will give us the kind of choices that we need to see what works and what doesn't work. And then I hope we will all have, at the local and state level, the willingness to either fix broken schools or close them, and not pretend that they are educating children any longer. States have to be willing to bite that bullet, I think, and it's a tough decision to make. But you can go into any city in America, you can take the same kinds of children from the same difficult backgrounds, and you can see one school that motivates those children year after year, and you can see another school just down the street that doesn't. And the difference is in their attitude, in personnel, in teaching styles and strategies. So we have to do a better job of doing what works for kids. And as we do that, then I believe we will begin to see the results of the kinds of investments that many states, and which the federal government is also participating in, to ensure that technological literacy is available for all students, that it's there, the computer in the classroom and the other skills that children need, that teachers become technologically literate. Once we have safe, orderly learning environments, once we have teachers and principals and parents once again in partnership, then when we add the kind of technological skills that children need, we can be confident that they are working because we can see the results. Now, once we look at what is needed in primary and secondary education, I think we have to admit that now is not the time to cut back on opportunities for young people to go on to college. And there are many, many young Americans who face rather significant financial obstacles to college education. And I would hope that the kind of commitment to higher education that has always been the hallmark of this state would continue by making it possible for every young person willing to take responsibility, willing to work hard, to get the resources needed through loans and scholarships and work-study programs. We have to open the doors of college, not only to the young, but to many who come to these two institutions, people in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, people in mid-career, people finishing work that they interrupted to have children, people who want to change what they are doing, people who've lost jobs looking for new skills. I believe that we should do everything possible when we know that education is the key to individual and community prosperity, to make sure that we have the resources available, investing in work study and scholarship and Pell Grants and loans. Those kinds of investments are the best investment a nation or a state can make. And we also should consider two of the recommendations that the President has made, and that would be to make $10,000 of college tuition tax deductible each year. And I would also hope we would consider providing merit scholarships for the top 5% of graduates in every high school, regardless of where those high schools are, so that every youngster has a chance. If we do that, then I believe the combination of these kinds of changes, starting in our homes, our child care centers, our elementary schools and high schools, and going on into our community colleges and universities, will more than prepare us educationally for the next century. We will also have to take on some other challenges. We'll have to be sure that we have some answers to economic insecurity, to the downsizing, to the layoffs, to the rapid changes in work patterns. We'll have to be sure that the incomes that Americans are able to earn keep pace with their standard of living, and we'll have to be sure that those Americans on the lowest end of the pay scale who earn minimum wage or slightly above are able to support a family and not just in poverty after they've worked 40 hours a week. We will also have to be sure that we continue the success we are starting to have in taking our neighborhoods and streets back from crime and drugs and violence. Homicide. The homicide rate is down in every major city. That's the good news. The bad news is that many people in rural areas are seeing crime that they never thought they'd have to live with, and that teenagers, unfortunately, many of them very damaged youngsters with no conscience, are committing terrible crimes. And so we're going to have to turn our attention, as the President has said, to an almost united effort, which he's asked the FBI to work on, as we did when we went against the mafia or against communist agents or any other threat to our well-being. But we're beginning to see results from more police on the streets, tougher sentences, longer sentences. That is beginning to work. We will also have to be sure we get the right balance between economic growth and environmental protection. We have to make it possible for us to leave to our children and grandchildren both economic opportunity and clean air and water and the land we love as we found it, if not in better shape than we arrived. We will also have to confront our challenges around the world, because with the end of the Cold War, as we all now know, we ended one set of terrible dangers, the kind of dangers that when I was going to Eugene Field Elementary School in Park Ridge, Illinois, we would go out and do our, I don't know if any of you remember this, we would go out and do our civil defense drills. We would sit with our heads down up against our lockers or under our desks to protect against some kind of attack from the Soviet Union. Well, thank goodness there are no more Soviet nuclear missiles pointed at any school child in America, and we should be very grateful for that. But we have other problems, don't we? We have ethnic and religious and racial violence breaking out, old and ancient conflicts that have broken through the surface again. And they not only threaten the lives and well-being of the people who are involved, but they also threaten to destabilize large parts of the world, and that is not in America's interests. We need to have as stable and secure a world as possible. We need it for economic reasons so that we can trade and export and continue to grow as we are. And we need it for humane and moral reasons. We want more peace. We know that's better for us, but it's also better for others. And we have to be sure our political system works. We have to be sure that the decisions that are made in Washington or Springfield are the decisions of the people and not of special interests. We have to be sure that our political system is reformed, and we desperately need campaign finance reform so that every citizen feels comfortable about the decisions being made. Now, all of these challenges are big ones, and we know that they're not going to be easy, and even if we make progress on them, there will not be a steady line of success. But if we look back on American history, if we think about the greatest of American presidents who came right from here, we certainly know that this country has faced much more serious challenges. We, thank goodness, don't have a civil war to confront, or a Great Depression, or world wars. We don't even have a Cold War with all that meant to us. But we have our own set of challenges. And the only way we can address those is the way we have addressed every other one in our past. President Lincoln said right on the steps of the old state capitol in this very city, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He was talking about literal divisions between North and South, but we have our own divisions that may not seem so apparent, but could be just as dangerous if we don't address them. We have to be willing to reach across some of those divides that separate us. We have to be willing to work together, to treat each other with respect, to know that even if we look different one from the other, we are at root all Americans looking for the same opportunity to achieve the American dream. This came through to me very clearly when my daughter and I were recently in Bosnia. I was honored to be able to go to meet not only our American soldiers there, but civilians who had survived 4 terrible years of ethnic cleansing, of rape as an instrument of war, of the most horrific kinds of human rights abuses. I spoke with doctors who had kept hospitals going under bombardment. I talked with wives and mothers who hadn't seen their husbands and fathers for years. I spoke with people who were so grateful that the bombs had stopped and that they at least had a chance to try to resume a normal life. And then I went out and visited with our American soldiers who are there enforcing that peace. I wish every one of you in this auditorium could have been with me. You would have been so proud. I was at Tuzla, the main base where our forces are headquartered, but I also went out to 2 outposts, Camp Alicia and Camp Bedrock. And there I met our soldiers, men and women, black, brown, white, Christian, Muslim, Jew, from the country, from the city, rich kids, poor kids, every kind of American you could imagine. And as I was talking with them and asking what they thought, over and over again, I heard them say to me, you know, we're starting to see life come back to normal. We're seeing kids playing. We're seeing some farmers willing to go out in their fields. We're seeing wash being hung out on the line of houses that still don't have their windows or doors put back. And these soldiers, more even than what they were doing to separate the combatants, were sending a signal to the people in Bosnia and people all over the world that this is what it will take to get along. That in America it has been possible for us to work together for more than 200 years. Now that doesn't mean we all like each other. There are a lot of people I don't like. But I was raised to believe in school and in church and in my community that I had to respect people. I had to tolerate people who were different from me, and I had to figure out a way to work with them. That may be our greatest export. As we look around the world and we see people who are of the same ethnic background but killing each other over religion, or killing each other over tribal membership, or killing each other over ancient conflicts that they would be hard-pressed to really recall in detail. Here at home, we are exporting democracy. We are exporting that central idea that all of us have a stake in something that is bigger than any of us. And when I look at our challenges, facing this country in the future, I am absolutely confident that despite our setbacks, despite our problems from time to time, that the blessings we too often take for granted will carry us through if we approach the future with optimism and hopefulness and the kind of confidence that has always marked every American generation before. And there is no more important part of meeting that challenge than how we educate all of our people. And I want to thank you in this community for setting an example about how it should be done. Thank you all very much.